Sangita, thanks so much for joining me today. You've had a great career through different areas, pharmaceuticals, banking, FMCG, and then back in FMCG. I want to ask you, what were the breakout moments or the turning points in your journey?
Quite a few breakout moments or turning points. I think the very first one was when I decided to become a marketeer and not a doctor, which is what I always wanted to become. That happened at that point of time when I was growing up. There weren't too many options in terms of researching what's right for you. There was no internet. Your friends and family were really your social network. And through them, I came to this choice with some self-evaluation as to what's right for me. And I think in hindsight, I made the right choice. The second one, as I look at my career, when I transitioned through different sectors, the first time I moved from the pharmaceutical to the FMCG sector, I think was one breakout moment which helped me realize my potential. And the third one that I would call out was just in terms of elevating myself in the organization when I once again changed roles from FMCG to banking and elevating myself from being a middle management person to really a senior leadership team member.
So, looking back, the transition from a middle management to senior, leadership position is always a mental one rather than a designation one. When did the penny drop for you?
So, absolutely right. I think you have to first elevate yourself in your own mind. And you have to have a great belief in yourself that you're up for that challenge. I think it finally sinks in only when you get into the role. But I think before that comes the entire aspect of being ready to take on a new challenge, being ready to take on a new assignment. You obviously don't know enough about it. I think the penny drops only when you get into the role, you define the challenge, and you clearly define your first 90-day agenda.
Okay. We'll talk about that, Sangita. But FMCG professionals are very sought after across industries because I think they segment everything in their mind and they're natural marketeers. So I'm going to ask you, when you went into banking, what were the cross learnings? What is the freshness that you brought into banking? I know because that was your role in banking.
I think a marketeer is a marketeer in any sector. I think the first principles don't change. So the consumer being at the heart of decision making, I think was the biggest change that I made when I moved from FMCG to banking. And the way different sectors make decisions, the starting point is quite different. And in banking, that is what was perhaps requiring a lot of strengthening, and that's really the freshness that I brought in. And then to make sure that all your decisions start with the unmet need of the consumers, and how do you create an ecosystem and an organization around you carrying people along and the other stakeholders along to really buy into that goal and that new way of working.
So as you made transitions from one industry to the other, what was the learning that you went through?
I think one of the biggest learning is that as you move organizations, and especially when you move sectors, the culture of each of these places is very, very different. When I moved from the pharmaceutical industry to FMCG, the culture was very different. It was less formal. And when I moved back to banking, I was told that I'm perhaps too aggressive. And I think the biggest lesson is about your own leadership and your ability to adapt to changing cultures in each of these organizations.
Fair enough. I'm going to ask you, when you look at the breakout moment, I think one thing that you did tell me was when you decided to get out of your comfort zone and take an international assignment, and how you learned on the job and how that opened up the world to you. I'm going to ask you, it's very important for young professionals to take that leap of faith, to go and experiment in new markets. What were the challenges and what was the learning from them?
So the cultural context that I talked about happens when you change sectors. It also happens when you change geographies. And it's very critical for young people as they chart out their careers to recognize that it is absolutely critical to get experience across geographies. What that does for you is gives you an experience in a completely different economy where the growth drivers could be completely different. So you're operating in a very, very different business environment. Second, your consumer set is very different. So for example, when I went to Dubai is really a multicultural country with a lot of expats residing in the same market. And hence, as a marketer, the challenge for me was to talk to the different consumer groups and find a unified way of marketing with a very diverse and disparate set of consumers who had very different needs. So that I think becomes again very critical by way of experience. And the third and the most important thing is really the people. So you are in a very different cultural context, and just being sensitive to people from different nationalities, understanding how you should say things, how you should not say certain things. Certain gestures mean very different things in different markets. So I think just the cultural sensitivity gets absolutely heightened when you're exposed to different markets.
We have a very, very good representation in the FMCG sector. A lot of Indians have done very well. Why do you think that happens? Is that because you're naturally used to dealing with such a multicultural mix within India that you naturally do well? Because a lot of the big FMCG companies have a very good representation on the top with Indians.
So I think India has been a source of talent for many organizations across sectors. I think we've seen of late a lot of people in the FMCG sector really rise to great levels in their global organizations. I think a lot of FMCG companies also have career pathing, which really provides opportunities at a junior and a middle level, whereby they send their talent across different geographies and different kind of markets, both emerging and developed and developing markets, which really readies people for greater challenges as they rise up through the levels. The second thing I think is the complexity in the Indian market itself, the kind of challenges that you are faced with. So I think if you have a combination of challenging assignments in India and great experience with good career pathing, I think it leads you to the path of general management in global organizations.
How is our education system gearing up for the changes and for the demands that the job is throwing up right now, Sangita? Because it's a very dynamic, pretty much every segment and sector is going through a lot of dynamic change.
Right. So I think a lot of alternate learning modules have come in, even in the current curriculum in schools. And you see a lot of education institutions now resorting to Western ways of learning. And I think those days where it was all about competitiveness and it was about standing first in your class, vis-a-vis really recognizing the breadth of learning and different platforms for learning is what a lot of institutions are providing today, which I think is fascinating, because really when students get out of school and get out of college, they're not just competing in India. If you aspire to study abroad, it's really the world you're competing against. And hence, I think providing best-in-class education systems, which are in line with the Western world teaching platforms, I think is critical, and a lot of institutions are following that path today.
What can online do? How can you take this online? And what are the need gaps that an online platform can fulfill, you think?
An online platform,
education platform, or training, or case study, dissemination, etc.
So online for corporates and for people who are already employed, I think is a fantastic platform, simply because it gives you an opportunity to learn even as you work. It gives you the flexibility to be able to find the time at your convenience to really embrace the training curriculum. More importantly, I think if you just look at world over, the way of training whereby it becomes far more interactive and far more enjoyable, far more simulated, I think is a huge way of learning for people, which is now really gaining importance across many, many organizations. I think when we talk about education and online education, I think that again has a very, very critical role. The Khan Academy is a classic example, which has been talked about and enough has been written about it, where it has really transformed the way both the kind of learning mechanism it provides for students, which is not really about reading and memorizing things, but whereby you provide the logic for learning, make the learning far more enjoyable for students, I think is again a great way. So whether it's for students or whether it is for people who are in the corporate world, the combination of making the learning very real, very simulated, and being convenient, I think are some of the advantages.
Coming back to your journey, very often you learn from missteps or mistakes. What was the one mistake that you learned from, if you can share it with our viewers?
I think as you grow we'll start again. As you grow in your leadership journey and as you progress on your leadership journey, it's very important to be self-aware. I think I wasn't that self-aware in my initial years of working. And one of the classic examples that I talk about very often is when you seek feedback from people around you, it's really like holding up a mirror to yourself. And I think it was one of those programs which really helped me identify some of my weaknesses, and a lot of it had to do about my ability to delegate in my this pursuit for perfection, where I would end up doing a lot of things myself. I think one of the programs and feedback from my stakeholders told me that I need to really let go. So I think my biggest learning is that early on in your career, if you have the opportunity to get feedback from people and really be far more self-aware, it probably helps you accelerate your leadership journey.
What is your one proudest moment? I think when did you sit back and say, hey, I think I've really made a mark? What was that moment for you?
I think for me, moving into my current role, which is something that I'd aspired for all my life, to become the general manager in an organization where the values of the organization were in sync with my own values, an organization which had a strong brand that was well respected and accepted by the consumers, was something that I always wanted to do. So when I really managed to get into this role, I think that by far, I would say, has been my proudest moment.
This role has also allowed you to interface very actively with the board of the company on an international footing. What is the learning that you've had when you have been in the leadership board at Kellogg, both in the region and internationally, when you interface with them? And how do you see the industry evolving? Because India is, the market is evolving very fast, and it, is a far more evolved market elsewhere in the developed world. So what are the learnings that you've picked up?
So from a leadership perspective, if I look at Kellogg Asia Pacific, it's a fantastic leadership team that we have. I think just looking at the way decisions are made at the board level, in terms of India, of course, has been a market that's been doing quite well over the last few years. Your ability to, first, I think it's very important to build credibility for yourself. Every time you need to go up and ask for investments, I think your track record really is very critical in terms of being able to deliver what you promised the last time around. And third, I think putting up a strong and a compelling business case as you seek investments, again, becomes very critical. So I think your credibility as a leader, your credibility of the organization that you lead is, I think, the most important thing. And two, making sure that you really present your business case in a strong and a compelling manner, seeking investments, I think is a skill that you need to acquire and develop. And with a lot of belief in the future, you need to really sell your vision to the board.
I want to talk about marketing a breakfast cereal like Kellogg. I mean, you've done a great job over the last couple of years because you had to really break through a very conservative segment of Indians who still are used to Indian breakfast, formats or options. What were the lessons when you actually went out in the market, and how has your approach to reaching out to the customer changed?
So lots of lessons over the last 4 to 5 years. One, I think it was very important for us from the perspective of the category that we market to make sure that we educate people and give them a strong enough reason to buy into this category. With the increasing levels of health and wellness, we realize that people are far more conscious of what they eat today. I think one of the things we pride ourselves in is we have a very, very strong consumer practice at Kellogg's. So it helps you constantly to keep your finger on the pulse of the consumer. And as we continue to track the journey of the consumer and how the consumers evolve, making sure your innovations keep pace in line with the changing consumer needs is important. But like I said before that, the entire piece around educating the consumer. So our campaign on Anaj Ka Nashta came really from that insight. a lot of people didn't know what cereals are made of, and it was important for us to tell consumers that. There was no better way of finding the right cultural context, and anaj is something that every Indian really understands, and the cereals that we make are made out of anaj. It's just that the consumers did not know that, and we found that insight, we found the right proposition and put it forward in a strong, compelling manner. The other thing is also in terms of the way the consumer is shifting and the shopper is changing. Today, the consumers and shoppers are far, far more empowered. They really have a plethora of choices. The power is in their hand, where they can look at various products, compare them, have them delivered at their doorstep at their own convenience, at the price that they really aspire to pay. So that really changes what we call the path to purchase, or the consumer or customer journey in terms of decision making. And I think that really opens up lots of possibilities in terms of revisiting your business models, looking at your route to market, looking at your supply chain, your ability as an organization to be ready to dive into huge amount of data and analytics, because today with the entire social media platform and with e-commerce, it's really become possible to look at consumer and shopper behavior, and for organizations to really harness that data to drive their business results.
That gets me to the other question. Now, companies have far more intelligence, Sangita, than when you started off. What has the transition been in the real, how technology has made going to consumer and getting consumer insights easier from the time that you started off to now?
Sure. So, if you rewind 20 years back in time, a lot of it had to be face-to-face contact with the consumer, either through research agencies, though we believe that even today, there is no substitute to a direct conversation with the consumer. And direct consumer contact or direct conversation is for the managers, not necessarily through a research agency. So I think that truth still remains. I think tools and technology has only enabled us to get access to the consumer in a far more easier manner and in a far more faster and agile manner. So that's all that has enabled. The other thing is because consumers are now far more empowered, as I said, it's possible to have databases created which really track consumer behavior. It's always been the case for banks, for telecom companies. I think the FMCG companies are now getting onto this journey in India, whereby it's possible to really look at consumer and shopper behavior and then put out very targeted and sharp programs which can either predict the behavior of the consumer in the future or provide the right propositions for the right consumer segments based on the data analytics that you harness.
How much of data analytics do you use, for example, in Kellogg?
So for us, I think so far it has still been, a lot of it has been around insights that we derive talking to the consumers and shoppers. We've just commenced our journey in terms of looking at analytics. I think we are right just at the beginning, whether it's the consumer data or even in terms of the customer journey, whereby it's all about providing digital solutions to our field force, for example. But from a consumer marketing standpoint, in terms of our advertising spends, a significant part of our spends have moved on to digital. And also, I think the future lies in content marketing. So, for example, we have a wonderful association with Chota Bheem, and there is content that's been co-created with one of our strongest assets, which is Coco the Monkey, with Chota Bheem. It's the same target audience of kids that two brands are really working on, and I think the two brands have come together beautifully to create content. The second example would be in terms of online campaigns that we have created, knowing that's where the consumer spends most of her time. And the entire customization campaign on cornflakes, led by an insight that consumers want flexibility and they want variety in their food, that was the genesis of the campaign. But we chose to create a campaign which was an only online campaign. And we created 100 videos of different recipes on cornflakes. So I think to come back to your question, We've started our journey. Our digital spends have moved. We have got content marketing as an important peg to our entire marketing programs. I think our journey on data and analytics has also commenced, and it will only go stronger, and we'll continue to invest in this space.
One question on data analytics. How closely do you work with other Kellogg offices? Because there is a lot to be shared in terms of insights.
Yes.
So what is that piece looking like?
So, data analytics, if you're talking about quantitative, I think as a multinational organization, where we can benefit is really looking at the systems and processes that other Kellogg companies use, and how do we borrow those and really lean on that experience that the other group companies already have. The data and the insights have eventually got to be created locally. Sure. So I think the systems and processes can come through the global organization, and there's a lot of experience in the West because these are developed markets who've been much further in this journey. But at the end of it, these need to be deployed in India, and you need insights for your local consumers.
Sure. Let's focus on the youngsters. When you've seen a fair crop of youngsters come out of B schools and join the workforce, how do you think they have changed, and have they kept pace with the fast and rapidly changing market environment?
So I think every organization is faced with the struggle of making sure that you're able to hire the right quality of talent, and the war for talent, I think, is the biggest challenge that every organization faces. More importantly, I think it's critical to understand that the expectations, especially the millennials, their expectations are very different. I think today they no longer seek to be employees necessarily, but what they're seeking is wider and richer experiences. Mm-hmm. And they really want to make sure that they maximize their experiences in a short period of time. And it's very important, I think, for the youngsters to really understand that width of experience is important, but equally the depth of experience is also important. So while you're in a hurry to accelerate your career, do so by making sure that you stay for long enough, and longevity and enough time spent in every role, I think, becomes very critical. But organizations are gearing up to really keep pace with the changing expectations. And as I said, they're not seeking to be really employees. They're seeking to be really corporate citizens, creating rich experiences.
Tell me something. In your journey, Sangita, who were the people you looked up to? Who were the role models that you emulated, looking back?
At a personal level, early on, my father has been a role model for me. One of my professors in my business school has been a role model for me. I think the entire pursuit of perfection came to me from my professor, who taught me that even if it was about drawing a line, and he was a very, very well-respected marketer himself and a marketing professor, but he taught me the art of doing whatever you're doing, do it really well. And that applies to every sphere in life and work. And from my father, I think I picked up the entire thing of the need to persevere, the need to really, really work hard. And my father started his medicine in Pakistan and came to India with absolutely nothing and not knowing anybody. And he really struggled and became very, very successful. So I think the entire, his story has been truly inspirational for me. And that's been one of my mottos, that you don't really give up in life so easily, and you try and find solutions in life to really get to your goal. And if you seek out something, it truly happens.
So what would your advice be to youngsters wanting to be where you are, and saying that, hey, if I want to be in the FMCG sector, I want to reach the top of an organization like Kellogg, what would your advice be to them?
So, couple of advices. One, from the perspective of just the business. If you aspire to be in the FMCG space, make sure you're passionate about people. It's important. Your consumer shoppers are all people. And I believe that great insights are the biggest enablers for a business to succeed. And great insights really come from those people who are curious about people. So have that passion to talk to people, to really constantly find the truth, to ask the question why several times, and really unearth some insights that can unlock the business. So always be passionate about the consumer, no matter what level you are at. The second thing would be what I said before in terms of just charting out your own career. Do not be in a hurry. So be patient, make sure you choose the right organization. The values of that organization is something that must resonate with your own set of values. And having got into an organization which you believe is right for you, make sure that you make your choices in terms of either changing roles or changing organizations in a pragmatic manner, having ensured that you've stayed long enough to make a difference to the organization and to yourself.
Right. You think if there is one challenge that people face when they want to make a move, especially women, what would it be, if you could put a little bit of emphasis on that?
For women, I think there is an important choice that they need to make is the right choice of spouse. I think that's absolutely critical. So that's irrespective of a move, but that's just a critical life decision for women, because that really very often decides their future. Women tend to otherwise make choices between family and their career. And I think if you have a husband who really understands and respects your aspirations, that task becomes that much easier in terms of getting you closer to your goal. And the second bit is women very often can be reticent about raising their hand when the right opportunity comes up, either because they're not confident or they're not sure of themselves. My advice to them would be, you're as good as a man. Have the belief and raise your hand.
Great. Last question. What would your message be to UpGrad? Because the whole idea of UpGrad is to stress on continuous education, to get digital as a platform, to allow a curated set of courses to help people go along. So how important is continuous education in a journey to the top? And B, what's your message for UpGrad?
I think it's a great initiative. Very, very befitting and well-timed for India, I would say. Both for students and for people who are in the corporate world. I think it would facilitate the learning process. It's a great solution for the corporates. I think as you see entrepreneurship in India, and India ranks amongst one of the top markets in terms of the level of entrepreneurship. So if we can enable that and help the entrepreneurs find the right answers to the questions who otherwise they would not find answers to very easily, I think it's fantastic, and eventually it's going to make a difference to the economy. And eventually for students, I think it would become a great learning platform, because there is nothing which is really at that scale and is available in an organized fashion for students today. And I genuinely believe that the learning process never stops. So it's fantastic that if we have a platform here that can work for different segments of the society, be it a person in the corporate field or an entrepreneur or student, it's going to make a very positive difference by way of employment and thereby to the economy.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.